All right, so you're getting ready for a payroll clerk interview, and you really want to make sure you nail it. Well, we've got some great stuff for you. This deep dive is going to use some resources from RoleCatcher. They've got this really awesome career guide.
Yeah.
And they've also got a whole bunch of sample interview questions. We're going to look at not just what kind of questions they might ask, but how you can answer them in a way that really makes you stand out from the crowd, ready to dive in.
Let's do it. I think a lot of people don't realize how much actually goes into getting ready for one of these interviews. It's way more than just knowing how to calculate overtime or anything like that.
Yeah, for sure. So first things first, let's paint a picture for everybody listening. What does a payroll clerk actually do all day? I mean, RoleCatcher mentions a lot of different responsibilities, but what's the real deal?
Okay, so think of it like this. A payroll clerk is like the unsung hero of any company. They make sure everyone gets paid the right amount and on time, which means they're juggling all this employee data, timesheets, vacation time, sick leave, and a ton more. It's all about being super precise and organized, and also staying on top of regulations that are always changing.
Gotcha. So like attention to detail is a big one here.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Even one tiny mistake could mean somebody doesn't get their paycheck. And that's a recipe for disaster. Actually, RoleCatcher's Career Guide tells the story about a payroll clerk who found this tiny decimal point error, and it ended up saving the company thousands of dollars.
Wow, that's crazy. It really shows you how much of an impact this role can have. But let's be real. Dealing with numbers all day might not be everyone's cup of tea. RoleCatcher also mentions some downsides to this kind of job, like a lot of repetition. So how do you know if this is actually the right fit for you?
That's a good point. You definitely have to be comfortable with routine tasks and actually working with all that data. But on the other hand, RoleCatcher's Career Guide really highlights the stability and work-life balance that you often get with a job like this. Because companies are always going to need someone to take care of payroll. It tends to be a really secure career path. And because the work is so cyclical, you can usually leave it all at the office when you're done for the day.
Makes sense. Okay, so let's say you've thought about the pros and cons, and you're ready to absolutely crush that interview. RoleCatcher has a ton of sample interview questions, so we're going to walk through some of the tougher ones together and hopefully give you some killer strategies. All right, so first up, can you walk me through your experience with payroll processing? This one feels kind of broad. Where do you even start with something like that?
You're right, it is really broad. And that's on purpose. The person interviewing you wants to see how you think things through and how well you get the whole payroll process. Don't just list out all the software you've used. Instead, start with the basics, like getting timesheets, putting all that data into the system, calculating everyone's wages, dealing with taxes and all the different deductions, and then finally getting those paychecks out.
So it's like telling the story of your whole payroll journey. But how do you make it stand out? How do you make it interesting and memorable for the interviewer?
That's where your personal experience comes in. Weave in some specific examples of what you've actually done. Have you worked with any payroll software? Did you ever have to deal with a really challenging situation, like having to use a brand new system or finding a weird discrepancy? Those kind of details will make you stand out, and they show you've got real experience doing this stuff.
It's about showing you're not just a robot. You're not just following instructions. You're someone who takes the initiative and figures out how to solve problems.
Okay, so what about those follow-up questions? What if they want to know more about a specific piece of software you mentioned?
That's where being prepared is so important. You have to be ready to explain what the software does, how you used it, and even what challenges you had to overcome. And that's where RoleCatcher's AI can be super helpful. They have this tool that actually analyzes your answers and compares them to the best possible responses for specific payroll clerk roles. And then it gives you personalized feedback. It's like having this secret weapon in your pocket.
Wow, that's incredible. Okay, next question. How do you ensure compliance with all the federal, state, and local payroll laws and regulations? This one seems like a big one.
It is. Payroll isn't just about being good at math. It's also about understanding all these legal things. The interviewer wants to see that you're aware of how complex this stuff can be and that you're committed to following all the rules. Okay, so how do you even get ready for a question like that? Do you have to memorize every single payroll law?
No, you don't have to know absolutely everything off the top of your head, but you should be familiar with all the major laws and regulations, especially those in your local area. Think about things like minimum wage, overtime rules, tax withholding, and all the different reporting requirements.
Okay, that makes sense. But how do you actually answer the question in a way that really impresses them?
Don't just say something generic like, I'm aware of the Fair Labor Standards Act. Tell them about a time when you actually applied it. Did you calculate overtime pay for a bunch of employees? Have you ever dealt with wage garnishments? Sharing those concrete examples shows that you have real practical knowledge. And to really go the extra mile, talk about how you stay up to date on all the changes to the regulations. Do you subscribe to any industry newsletters? Do you attend webinars? Show them you're committed to constantly learning and growing.
That's a great tip. So it's about turning all that theoretical knowledge into real experience. And speaking of experience, let's look at another common question. Can you describe a time when you had to resolve a payroll issue or discrepancy? This one kind of feels like that classic "tell me about a time you failed" question, but with a payroll twist.
Exactly. I mean, everyone makes mistakes, right? But it's how you handle those mistakes that really matters. So think about a situation that shows off your problem-solving skills, how detail-oriented you are, and your ability to stay calm when things get a little stressful.
Okay, so what would be a good example of something like that?
Okay, let's say you accidentally put in the wrong hourly rate for an employee, and that led to them getting underpaid. You could walk them through how you discovered that mistake, the steps you took to fix it, like recalculating their wages, giving them a back payment, and of course talking to the employee about what happened. And most importantly, you should explain how you made sure that kind of error never happened again.
So it's all about owning your mistakes, taking action to correct them, and showing what you learned from the whole experience. I bet RoleCatcher's AI could help someone craft a really strong answer to this kind of question, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Their AI can analyze your answer and tell you how well you're showing off your problem-solving abilities. It can even suggest ways to make your answer even better, based on the specific requirements of the job you're going for.
That's amazing. It's like having your own personal interview coach. Okay, next up, how do you maintain confidentiality when handling sensitive payroll information? This one seems especially important these days, with all the data breaches you hear about all the time.
You're absolutely right. It's super important. I mean, payroll involves handling a lot of personal data, and employers need to know that they can trust you with that information. So you want to start by acknowledging how important confidentiality is. And you could even mention any data privacy regulations that you're familiar with. Then give them some real examples of how you protect that sensitive information. Think about things like using strong passwords, being careful about phishing emails, shredding confidential documents, and never ever talking about employee information outside of the proper channels.
So it's all about showing them that you have a whole system in place to keep that data safe, both the physical documents and the digital information. You're not just aware of the rules, you live by them every single day. Okay, so let's move on to another one that really tests your ability to handle pressure. Can you describe a time when you had to work under pressure to meet a payroll deadline? I think everyone can relate to this one.
Yeah, it's definitely relatable. And that's exactly why they ask it. They want to see how you perform when things get a little crazy. You should pick a situation that really shows off your ability to stay calm. Prioritize all the different tasks you've got going on, and still deliver accurate results even when there's a tight deadline.
Okay, what kind of situation would be a good example here?
All right, so imagine there's this huge system glitch right before payroll's due. You could talk about how you figured out what was wrong, how you communicated with the IT people, maybe you found a way to process payroll manually as a workaround, and then eventually you got everything back on track.
So you're showing them you can think on your feet, you can adapt to those unexpected challenges, and you still get the job done. That's pretty impressive. And this could also be a chance to highlight your teamwork skills, right?
Oh, for sure. Did you work with your colleagues to meet the deadline? Did you keep your manager in the loop? Sharing those details really shows you're a team player who can handle the pressure. Okay, so next question. And this one's all about precision. How do you ensure accuracy when processing payroll? It might seem kind of basic, but it's still really important to answer well.
I get it. I mean, accuracy is everything in payroll. But how do you actually convince them that you're someone who's super detail-oriented?
By walking them through your process. Do you double-check all the data you enter? Do you use spreadsheets for all your calculations? Do you have a colleague review your work? Maybe you even have your own personal checklist. Whatever your system is, just describe it clearly and concisely.
Gotcha. So it's not just about saying, I'm accurate. It's about showing them the steps you take to actually guarantee that accuracy. I like it. Okay, let's tackle one that might seem a little intimidating. Can you describe your experience with payroll tax filings and reporting? This one feels like it could trip someone up, especially if they don't have a ton of experience.
You're right, tax filings can definitely be complex. But even if you don't have a lot of experience, you can still answer this question effectively. Honesty is key. So just acknowledge if you haven't directly handled those filings before, but then shift the focus to your willingness to learn and your ability to pick up new concepts quickly. You could mention any relevant courses or training you've had and highlight how good you are at doing research.
So you're basically turning what could be a weakness into a strength by showing that you're eager to learn and grow. Now I'm curious, how does RoleCatcher's AI help someone prepare for a question like this?
Their AI is super helpful for questions like this, especially if you don't have a ton of experience. It can guide you on how to structure your response, emphasizing those transferable skills you have, and showing that you're proactive about learning new things.
That's great to know. Okay, so let's move on to a question that focuses on communication. How do you communicate payroll-related issues or changes to employees? This one is all about being clear and empathetic, right?
Exactly. Payroll issues can be confusing and even a little stressful for people. So the interviewer wants to see that you can explain things in a way that's easy to understand and that you're doing it respectfully. You want to highlight your ability to break down complex information so that it's easy for everyone to get it, both in writing and when you're talking to someone face to face.
So you're not just a number cruncher. You can actually communicate with your colleagues.
Exactly. And don't forget to emphasize your empathy. Do you actually listen to employees' concerns? Do you try to find solutions that work for everyone? Those details show that you're not just there to deliver bad news. You're a problem solver who actually cares.
Okay, so let's wrap things up with a question that can feel a bit daunting. Can you describe your experience with payroll audits? This one feels like a great chance to show off your organizational skills and your knowledge of all those compliance rules.
Yeah, audits can seem scary, but they're a normal part of any business, and employers want to know you can handle them. What's the best way to approach a question like that? Well, if you've actually been through an audit before, you should describe what your role was and highlight how you contributed to a successful outcome. Did you gather all the necessary documentation? Did you communicate clearly with the auditors? Did you help resolve any issues that came up? All those details are really important.
So you're showcasing your ability to stay organized, follow all the procedures, and work well with others, even when things are a little stressful. But what if you've never actually been through an audit before?
That's okay. You can just emphasize your understanding of why audits are important and show that you're really eager to learn about that process. You could mention any relevant courses or training you've had and express that you're willing to dive in and contribute.
So it's about showing you're aware of compliance and you're ready to learn and grow, even if you don't have that specific experience yet. Now, before we move on, I wanted to touch on something that RoleCatcher brings up. They talk about how quickly the whole field of payroll is changing. Technology is changing everything.
It's so true. New software automation online platforms, all that's becoming the norm. It's so important to show that you're ready for this tech-driven future.
So how can someone getting ready for one of these interviews prove they're tech savvy? Do they need to know how to code or something?
Not necessarily, but you should definitely familiarize yourself with some of the common payroll software out there. You can mention any programs you've already used, even something as basic as spreadsheets, and highlight how quickly you can learn new systems.
Okay, so adaptability is a big one. But I imagine even with all this tech, those soft skills are still super important.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Communication, problem solving, critical thinking, those are always going to be valuable, even in a world that's driven by technology.
It's about finding that balance between technical skills and those human qualities. That's what makes you a well-rounded candidate. Okay, so let's switch gears and look at another crucial aspect that RoleCatcher outlines. They talk about career progression, all the different stages of a payroll clerk's career, from entry level all the way up to senior positions. It's not just about getting the job, it's about understanding where that job could lead you.
Exactly. Let's break it all down, starting with those entry-level positions.
Okay, so what are some of the typical responsibilities at that stage?
Well, according to RoleCatcher, entry-level payroll clerks usually help out with managing employee timesheets and paychecks. They verify all the information, calculate overtime and other types of leave, and they make sure those paychecks actually get distributed. They also play a part in making sure everything complies with the company's policies and regulations, resolving any discrepancies that come up, and just providing overall administrative support.
It sounds like a great way to learn the basics and get a good understanding of how the whole payroll process works. Okay, so what about the next step up? What does a junior payroll clerk do?
Junior payroll clerks tend to have more hands-on responsibilities. They're managing those timesheets, verifying information, calculating overtime and leave. and making sure those paychecks are accurate and sent out on time. They're also responsible for ensuring everything's compliant with the regulations, resolving any discrepancies, processing deductions and adjustments, preparing reports, and even helping out with those tax filings.
So it's definitely a step up in terms of responsibility and decision-making. What about those folks who really want to climb that career ladder? What's a senior payroll clerk role like?
A senior payroll clerk is basically in charge of the entire payroll process for the whole organization. They make sure all the timesheets and paychecks are accurate. They analyze and calculate those more complicated payroll components like bonuses and benefits. They develop and implement policies. They train and mentor those junior clerks. And they have to stay on top of all the latest regulations. They also work closely with other departments, conduct audits, and provide guidance whenever the company's implementing new software.
Wow, that's a real leadership position. So there's definitely a clear path for growth and advancement in this field.
Absolutely. And RoleCatcher's resources can be incredibly helpful at every stage of your career. Their AI can even help you tailor your resume and cover letter, practice for your interview, and even find some professional development opportunities that might be a good fit.
That's fantastic. It's like having a personalized career coach right there in your pocket. Now, I have a question about those professional development opportunities. RoleCatcher mentions certifications. Should you talk about those in an interview, even if you don't have them yet?
Oh yeah, definitely. Showing that you're taking initiative and that you're excited to learn is always a good thing. If you mention that you're thinking about getting certified, like becoming a certified payroll professional, it shows that you're committed to this field and that you're willing to invest in your own growth.
It's a way of saying, I'm not just here for a job, I'm here for a whole career. All right, so we've covered the main duties of a payroll clerk, the pros and cons, that crazy evolving tech landscape, what your career path could look like, and we dug into some of those tricky interview questions.
And we talked about how RoleCatcher's resources, especially their AI tools, can give you a real edge during your job search and throughout your whole career.
It's all about being prepared, presenting yourself as a strong candidate, and showing how much you care about this kind of work. But before we wrap up, let's give our listeners something to think about. With all this talk about accuracy, regulations, and technology, what can you do to stay ahead of the curve in the ever-changing world of payroll? The learning never really stops.
That's so true. Payroll is constantly changing. With new tech and new regulations popping up all the time, you can't just coast along.
So where should someone even start? It feels kind of overwhelming to keep up with everything.
I think focusing on a few key areas is a good place to begin. First, embrace all that new tech. Learn about those new payroll software programs and automation tools. There are so many resources online, webinars, even free trials you can check out.
It's kind of like learning a new language. The more fluent you are in payroll tech, the more valuable you become.
Exactly. Second, stay up to date on those regulatory changes. Subscribe to some industry newsletters. Maybe join a professional organization like the American Payroll Association, and go to conferences or webinars whenever you can.
So networking and continuous learning. Two key ingredients for success in any field, really.
I completely agree. And lastly, don't underestimate those soft skills we talked about earlier. Even in a world that's driven by technology, employers really value things like communication, problem solving, and critical thinking.
It comes down to being that well-rounded candidate. Technically proficient, adaptable, and a good communicator. Those qualities will help you no matter what career path you choose.
Absolutely. And remember, resources like RoleCatcher can be super helpful for staying ahead of the game. Their AI can help you find professional development opportunities, and their career guide is packed with insights from experts.
It's like having a personalized roadmap for success in the world of payroll. So to sum it all up, getting ready for a payroll clerk interview is more than just memorizing answers. It's about really understanding what the role is all about, showcasing your skills and experience, and showing how much you care about this field. It's also about recognizing that you're never really done learning, and being proactive about staying on top of everything that's changing.
Well said. And with the right preparation and the right resources, landing that payroll clerk job is just the first step in a really rewarding and dynamic career.
And that's a wrap on our deep dive into the world of the payroll clerk. We hope you found this episode helpful and insightful. Best of luck with your interview, and remember, you got this.
So you want to talk about how you figure out what was going on and then how you communicated with the IT team. Maybe you had to find some sort of workaround like processing everything manually, and then how you eventually got everything back on track.
So you're basically proving that you can think on your feet and adapt to those unexpected challenges and still get the job done. Pretty impressive. This could also be a good time to mention any teamwork skills you used, right?
Oh, for sure. Did you work with other people to meet the deadline? Did you keep your manager informed about what was going on? Those details show you can handle the pressure and that you're a team player. All right, next question. This one's all about being precise. How do you ensure accuracy when processing payroll? It might seem kind of basic, but it's still important to have a good answer.
Right, because accuracy is super important in this job. How do you convince them that you're really detail-oriented?
You have to explain your process. Do you double check every single thing you enter? Do you use spreadsheets to do all your calculations? Do you have someone else double check your work? Maybe you even have your own personal checklist. Whatever your system is, just explain it clearly and get to the point.
Gotcha. It's not just about saying, I'm accurate. It's about showing them what you do to guarantee that accuracy.
I like it.
Yeah.
Okay, let's look at one that could seem kind of scary. Can you describe your experience with payroll tax filings and reporting? This feels like one that could trip people up, especially if they don't have a lot of experience.
Yeah, tax filings can be pretty complicated. But even if you haven't done a lot of them, you can still give a good answer. Just be honest. If you haven't handled those filings directly, just say so. But then you want to focus on how willing you are to learn and how quickly you can pick up new things. You could mention any classes or training you've had and talk about how good you are at researching things. So you're turning a potential weakness into a strength by showing them you're eager to learn and grow. I'm curious, how does RoleCatcher's AI help someone prepare for a question like this?
Their AI is really great for these kinds of questions, especially when you might not have a ton of experience. It can help you figure out how to frame your answer, highlighting those skills that would transfer over from other jobs and showing that you're proactive about learning new things.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to a question that's more about communication skills. How do you communicate payroll-related issues or changes to employees? This one seems to be about being clear and empathetic.
Exactly. Payroll issues can be really confusing for people and maybe even a little stressful. So they want to see that you can explain things clearly and respectfully. You want to highlight your ability to break down those complicated ideas so that everyone can understand them, both when you're writing and when you're talking to someone in person.
So you're not just crunching numbers.
Yeah.
You're actually good at communicating with your colleagues.
Yeah, right. And don't forget to talk about how empathetic you are. Do you listen to your coworkers when they have concerns? Do you try to find solutions that work for everyone? Those little things show you're not just delivering the message, you're a problem solver who actually cares. Okay, so let's finish up with a question that can feel a little intimidating. Can you describe your experience with payroll audits? This is a great chance to show off how organized you are and how much you know about all those compliance rules.
Yeah, audits can seem scary, but they're a normal part of doing business. And employers want to know you can handle them. What's the best way to answer a question like that?
If you've actually been through an audit, you should talk about what your role was and focus on how you help things go smoothly. Did you collect all the documents they needed? Did you communicate well with the auditors? Did you help solve any problems that popped up? All those details are important.
So you're showing that you can stay organized, follow the procedures, and work well with others even when things are a little stressful. But what if you've never actually been through an audit?
That's okay. Just talk about why audits are important and how much you want to learn about the whole process. You can mention any relevant classes or training you've had and say that you're willing to jump in and do your part.
So it's all about showing you understand compliance and that you're ready to learn and grow, even without that specific experience. Now, before we move on, I wanted to touch on something RoleCatcher mentioned. They talked about how the whole payroll field is changing so fast. Technology is changing everything.
It's true. All that new software, automation, online platforms, it's all becoming the new normal. So it's super important to show that you're ready for this tech-driven future.
So how can someone who's getting ready for an interview show that they're tech savvy? Do they need to be a programmer or something?
No, not really, but it's definitely a good idea to learn about some of the common payroll software out there. You could mention any programs you've already used, even if it's something basic like spreadsheets, and talk about how quickly you can learn new systems.
So being adaptable is key. But even with all this new technology, I'm guessing those soft skills are still really important.
Oh, absolutely. Communication, problem solving, critical thinking, those are always going to be valuable, no matter how tech-driven the world becomes.
It's about finding that balance, having the technical skills, but also those human qualities. That's what makes a well-rounded candidate. All right, let's shift gears a bit and look at another important thing that RoleCatcher talks about. They discuss career progression. all the different stages of a payroll clerk's career, from entry level all the way up to senior positions. It's not just about getting the job, it's about seeing where that job could take you.
Exactly. Let's break it down, starting with those entry-level jobs.
Okay, so what are some of the things you'd typically be doing at that level?
So according to RoleCatcher Entry Level, payroll clerks usually help manage employee timesheets and paychecks, making sure all the information's correct, calculating things like overtime and different types of leave, and making sure those paychecks get to the right people. They also help make sure everything follows the company's rules and regulations. They fix any problems that come up, and they provide general administrative support.
Sounds like a good way to learn how things work and get a good overview of the whole payroll process. So what about that next step up? What does a junior payroll clerk do?
Junior payroll clerks usually have more hands-on responsibilities. They manage those timesheets, they check the information, they calculate overtime and leave, and they make sure those paychecks are accurate and get sent out on time. They're also responsible for making sure everything's compliant with the regulations, fixing any discrepancies, handling deductions and adjustments, preparing reports, and even helping out with tax filings.
So definitely more responsibility and more decision-making. What about those folks who really want to move up the ladder? What does a senior payroll clerk do?
A senior payroll clerk is basically running the whole payroll show for the entire company. They make sure all those timesheets and paychecks are accurate. They handle those more complex payroll things like bonuses and benefits. They come up with and implement policies. They train and mentor the junior clerks. And they have to stay on top of all those ever-changing regulations. They also work with other departments. They conduct audits. And they provide guidance whenever the company is switching over to new software.
Wow, so it's a real leadership role.
Yeah.
It sounds like there's a clear path for growth in this field.
Definitely. And RoleCatcher has some great resources that can help you at every step of your career. Their AI can even help you with things like your resume and cover letter, practicing your answers for interviews, and finding good professional development opportunities.
That's amazing. It's like having your own personal career coach.
Yeah.
And I have a question about those professional development opportunities. RoleCatcher mentioned certifications. Should you bring those up in an interview even if you don't have any yet?
Oh yeah, for sure. It's always good to show that you're motivated and eager to learn. If you mention that you're interested in getting certified, like becoming a certified payroll professional, it shows that you're serious about this field and you're willing to put in the work to improve.
It's a way of saying, hey, I'm not just looking for a job. I'm looking to build a career.
Yeah.
All right, so we've covered the main duties of a payroll clerk. We talked about the pros and cons, that crazy world of ever-changing technology, what your career path could look like, and we went through some of those tough interview questions.
And we highlighted how RoleCatcher's resources,
Yes.
especially those AI tools, can give you a real advantage in your job search and your career overall.
It's all about being prepared, presenting yourself as a great candidate, and showing your passion for this type of work. But before we wrap things up, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about. With all this talk about accuracy and regulations and technology, what can you do to stay ahead of the game in the world of payroll? Because the learning never really stops.
That's so true. Payroll is constantly evolving. New technology, new regulations. It's a lot to keep up with.
So where should someone even begin? It can feel overwhelming to try and stay on top of everything.
Yeah, it can feel like a lot. I'd say start by focusing on a few key things. First, you got to embrace technology. Get to know those new payroll software programs and all those automation tools. There's a ton of stuff online, like webinars and even free trials.
Yeah, it's kind of like learning a new language. The better you are with that payroll tech, the more valuable you'll be.
Exactly. The second thing is to stay informed about all those changes to the regulations. You can subscribe to some industry newsletters, maybe even join a professional organization like the American Payroll Association, and attend conferences or webinars whenever you can.
So it's all about networking and continuous learning. Two important things for success in any field, really.
Totally agree. And one more thing. Don't forget about those soft skills we talked about earlier. Communication, problem solving, critical thinking. Those are always in demand, even with all this new technology.
Yeah, it's about being that well-rounded candidate. You've got the technical skills, but you're also a good communicator and all that.
Absolutely. And remember, resources like RoleCatcher can be super helpful for staying ahead of the curve. Their AI can help you find those professional development opportunities. And their career guide is full of tips from experts.
It's like your own personal guide to success in the world of payroll. So to wrap things up, getting ready for a payroll clerk interview is more than just memorizing answers. It's about understanding the job, showing off your skills and what you've learned, and showing that you're really passionate about this kind of work. It's also about realizing that you never stop learning. and taking charge of your own development to stay on top of everything that's changing.
You nailed it. With the right prep and the right resources, landing that payroll clerk job is just the beginning of a really great career.
And that's a wrap on our deep dive into the world of the payroll clerk. We hope you found this episode helpful and maybe even a little bit inspiring. Best of luck with your interview, and remember, you've got this